In December of 2001, 27-year-old Christian Longo murdered his entire family in Oregon as his web of lies, debt, and financial fraud began to unravel. He first strangled his wife, Mary Jane Longo, then turned on their children in the most sadistic way imaginable. 4-year-old Zachary and 3-year-old Sadie were bound to rocks and carried to Yaquina Bay, where Longo threw them into the freezing water while they were still alive, leaving them to drown in the dark. Their youngest child, 2-year-old Madison, was drowned alone in the family bathtub. Afterward, Longo abandoned the bodies, fled the country, and lived under a false identity in Mexico for weeks while his children lay undiscovered. At trial, he attempted to shift blame by falsely claiming Mary Jane had killed the children first, a story dismantled by forensic evidence and rejected by the jury. Longo was convicted and sentenced to death in 2003, and later resentenced to life without parole in 2011, where he remains in prison. When Tupac Shakur was shot and killed at the age of 25 in September of 1996, his longtime rival, the notorious B.I.G., was reportedly devastated. Despite their very public feud, multiple people close to Biggie said he cried when he heard the news and appeared genuinely shaken, telling friends, "Shit got effed up somewhere along the way, but that was my end." The two had once been close friends, but everything changed in 1994, when Tupac was robbed and shot 5 times at a New York recording studio. Tupac believed people close to Biggie knew about the attack, especially after Biggie released the song "Who Shot Ya" soon afterward. Biggie insisted he had nothing to do with it and said the song had been recorded long before the shooting, but the damage was done. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry, fueled by diss tracks, media pressure, and growing paranoia about being shot, turned them into bitter enemies. But behind the scenes, Biggie reportedly feared the violence had gone too far and worried he might be next. 6 months later, Biggie was shot and killed in Los Angeles by a drive-by shooting at the young age of 24. Both murders still remain unsolved to this day, turning one of hip-hop's most famous rivalries into one of its darkest tragedies. This was the moment influencer Clavicular was live streaming from Miami when a known stream sniper jumped onto the hood of his Cybertruck, filming and taunting him while refusing to move. Viewers alleged the man had been following and harassing Clavicular in the weeks beforehand and is a known stalker in the industry. Clavicular then accelerated and ran the man over as his passengers panicked and asked if the man had just been killed, as Clavicular responded hopefully.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Is he dead?
I don't know.
Hopefully.
Clavicular, a polarizing looks-maxing influencer known for content focused on facial structure, body aesthetics, and the belief that men can change their face through disciplined posture and extreme cosmetic procedures, went in for questioning, but no criminal charges were publicly announced. Some argue Clav acted in self-defense or out of fear against a reckless stalker, while others say running him over crossed an irreversible line, turning harassment into a near-fatal event. Clavicular has since been banned from Kick and described the situation as unfortunate without providing any further information. Here's some extremely rare footage of a giant squid feeding on a much smaller squid. For centuries, giant squid were dismissed as pure myth, nothing more than sailor legends like the Kraken. Their existence wasn't even scientifically accepted until 1857, and humans didn't film one alive in the deep sea until 2012. Even today, they remain among the least observed large animals on Earth. They live thousands of feet below the surface in near total darkness, and almost no one in history has ever seen one actively hunting, let alone captured it on video. Here's an extremely rare compilation of wild animals shedding their antlers. Antlers are one of the fastest growing bones in the animal kingdom, and unlike horns, they're designed to fall off and regrow every year. While antlers are growing, they're covered in a soft, blood-rich skin called velvet that supplies oxygen and nutrients to the developing bone. Once the antlers reach full size, rising testosterone levels cut off that blood supply, the velvet dies, and the animal rubs it off against trees and brush to expose the hardened bone beneath. After mating season ends, hormone levels drop again, the bone weakens at the base, and the entire antler eventually detaches and breaks away. This cycle allows deer, elk, and moose to grow a completely new set of antlers each year, often larger than the last. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 123. In July of 2025, 43-year-old Clinton Brink and his wife Kristen were hiking with their 2 young daughters, ages 7 and 9, at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas when they were suddenly attacked on a remote trail by a stranger armed with a knife. Witnesses later described the man as having an unsettling death stare before he suddenly launched the assault without warning or provocation. Clinton immediately fought off the attacker to buy time for his family to escape, while Kristen ran the girls to safety and then returned to to help her husband. Both parents were fatally stabbed during the struggle. The children were later found uninjured about a half a mile away, having been protected by their parents' final acts of bravery. A 5-day multi-state manhunt later ensued after investigators discovered blood at the scene that didn't belong to either victim. The suspect, 28-year-old teacher Andrew James McGann, was eventually located and arrested at a barbershop in Springdale, Arkansas, where he was in the middle of getting a haircut to alter his appearance. 7. This is the facial reconstruction created from a severed human head found in an Illinois park in 1993, the only clue investigators had for nearly 3 decades. The victim remained unidentified until 2022, when DNA genealogy revealed she was Susan Lund, who disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1992 after walking to a nearby store. Despite finally learning her name almost 30 years later, the rest of her body was never recovered. No suspect was ever charged, and her murder remains unsolved. This is a decorative tower filled with thousands of shaved human jawbone fragments, removed from patients during cosmetic jaw reduction surgeries in South Korea. The display came from a Seoul plastic surgery clinic, where the surgeon stacked discarded pieces of patients' faces into stacked columns to represent how many operations he had performed. The towers sparked public backlash and were later removed after authorities fined the clinic for violating medical waste laws requiring human remains to be incinerated. The case became a disturbing symbol of how normalized extreme facial alteration has become in South Korea, to the point that many patients have even reported being questioned at border control because their faces no longer match their passport photos. Morbid Facts, Part 861. In February of 2025, 22-year-old Daniel Waterman was left comatose after a violent interstate crash in Florida, leaving him with severe head and spinal injuries. After briefly regaining consciousness months later, he told investigators the crash was intentional, alleging that his pregnant girlfriend, 24-year-old Leah Mumby, deliberately drove the car into a tree during an argument, accelerating as he tried to escape and telling him, "I don't care what happens, you'll get what you deserve." Mumby initially said she did not remember what happened before the crash. Waterby died from his injuries in October of 2025, and prosecutors later upgraded her charges to vehicular homicide. In 1962, the United States detonated a nuclear warhead in space during the Starfish Prime test, exploding it about 250 miles above Earth. The blast was far more destructive than expected, knocking out or damaging multiple satellites, creating artificial radiation belts that lingered for years, and causing electrical failures as far away as Hawaii. The test proved that nuclear explosions in space were unpredictable and capable of long-term damage to both technology and Earth's near-space environment, effectively ending any further attempts once scientists realized the harm could not be controlled. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. 2. Austin Chumley Russell is best known as the laid-back fan favorite on Pawn Stars, but his life briefly veered off course in 2016 when police raided his Las Vegas home during a sexual assault investigation. The SA allegations were later dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the search uncovered a loaded firearm along with methamphetamine, marijuana, and Xanax. Chum was arrested and later pleaded guilty to a felony weapons charge and a misdemeanor drug charge, receiving probation, counseling, and rehab instead of prison time. He later cleaned up his life, lost 150 pounds, stayed on the show, and has spoken openly about focusing on his health and sobriety afterward. In 2010, an undercover journalist working for the dissident outlet Asia Press smuggled out rare footage from North Korea showing a severely malnourished 23-year-old homeless woman who said she survived by eating grass. Her voice was so weak that the reporter couldn't clearly record her name, and her identity has never been verified. Months later, local contacts reported she was found dead in a nearby cornfield, believed to have collapsed from starvation while desperately trying to eat raw corn. North Korea's state media never acknowledged the footage, but defectors reported heightened surveillance and crackdowns in the area afterward, with anyone suspected of leaking information facing severe punishment. For years, rumors circulated that prostitutes who went to a pig farm outside of Vancouver never came back. That's because Canadian serial killer Robert Pickton was murdering them on his property. From the late 1980s to the early 2000s, dozens disappeared after being lured there, where they were killed, dismembered, and fed to the pigs. DNA from multiple victims was later found scattered across the farm, and in 2007, Pickton was convicted of 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life, though prosecutors argued he killed at least 26 women. According to court records and police testimony, Pickton told an undercover police officer posing as a cellmate that he had killed 49 women and was upset he was caught right before making it to 50. Benjamin Guggenheim was a wealthy American industrialist traveling aboard the Titanic in 1912. As the ship sank, he refused a lifeboat, insisting that women and children go first. He reportedly changed into evening clothes with his valet and prepared to die on board the ship. Before disappearing below deck, Guggenheim is said to have asked a survivor to tell his family that he, quote, played the game straight to the end and that no woman or child was left behind because Ben Guggenheim was a coward. His body was never recovered. Patients playing instruments while surgeons operate directly on their brains. During certain brain surgeries called awake craniotomies, patients are kept fully conscious while doctors remove tumors or treat severe epilepsy. The brain itself cannot feel pain, so surgeons can safely work while the patient is awake. Patients are asked to talk, sing, or play instruments during the operation, so doctors can map exactly which parts of the brain control speech, movement, and music. If the patient suddenly loses coordination or stops playing correctly, surgeons immediately know they're too close to an important area. In some cases, patients can hear the drilling and feel pressure but experience no pain. Some even have full conversations with the surgical team while their brain is exposed. This insane process allows doctors to remove as much of the tumor as possible while avoiding permanent damage to speech, memory, or motor function. So while it looks unreal, these patients are actually helping to guide their own brain surgery in real time. In 2021, Mexican rapper Dan Sur went viral after revealing he had surgically implanted gold chains into his scalp to replace his hair. He claimed doctors inserted medical hooks directly into his skull so the chains would permanently hang from his head, calling it gold hair. Plastic surgeons who saw the videos warned the procedure was extremely dangerous, with high risks of infection, scarring, and damage to the skull, and said that no reputable clinic would ever perform it. In 2020, a nurse named Donna Montacone, while working at Yale University's fertility center, secretly stole fentanyl from at least 175 vials intended for women undergoing egg retrieval procedures. Over a 5-month period, she replaced the powerful opioid with saline to conceal the theft, leaving patients to endure the invasive procedure with little or no pain relief. Several women later described the pain as torturous and traumatic, including at least one patient who underwent 8 retrievals while fully awake. When patients questioned the severity of the pain, Montacone allegedly assured them it was normal, delaying detection of the abuse. Investigators later determined she was diverting the fentanyl to support her own opioid addiction. She was arrested in 2020, pleaded guilty to drug tampering charges, and was later sentenced to federal prison.
Princess Diana dead. Oh, she died. Where's the remote?
Oh my God.
That was the moment a group of friends accidentally recorded the exact second the world learned Princess Diana was dead. In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana and Dottie Fayed left the Ritz Hotel in Paris after being followed by paparazzi. Their driver sped through the city, apparently trying to lose them, and lost control inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, slamming directly into a concrete support pillar. The impact killed the driver and Dottie Fayed instantly. Diana was pulled from the wreck alive and rushed to the hospital, where doctors desperately fought for hours to save her. At first, reports said she was only injured, and most people couldn't even fathom the idea that she might actually die. News stations described her condition as serious but stable, and the world waited for updates, not realizing how bad it really was. At 4 a.m., French officials confirmed she had died from massive internal injuries at just 36 years old. The news spread instantly as broadcasts were interrupted, radios were stopped, and millions woke up to headlines announcing the sudden death of the most famous woman on Earth. Within hours, crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, covering the gates with flowers and letters. One man in the car did survive the crash, Diana's bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. He was the only person wearing a seatbelt, but still broke just about every bone in his face, lost much of his memory, and later said the trauma haunted him for the rest of his life. Investigators later found that driver Henry Paul was heavily intoxicated and driving at extremely high speed. They also confirmed that Diana was not wearing a seatbelt, and experts believe that if she had been restrained, she likely would have survived. Her death became one of the largest public mourning events in world history, with over 2 billion people watching her funeral and an entire generation remembering exactly where they were when they heard of her passing. After her funeral, Diana was buried on a small island in the middle of a lake on her family's property in England. The grave is surrounded by water and trees and is not accessible to the public. This was the moment a couple of Christian extremists realized their lives were over, as courtroom footage shows Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari standing at their arraignment after their 10-month-old daughter Mary died from severe malnutrition and dehydration caused by prolonged neglect. Prosecutors revealed the infant weighed just 8 pounds at the time of her death and showed signs of extreme starvation after being deprived of adequate food, water, and medical care for weeks. The medical examiner ruled her death entirely preventable, ruling she died from starvation rather than illness. The parents later claimed extreme isolated religious beliefs led them to reject modern medical care and even attempted to use those beliefs as a defense in court. In 2019, Seth Welch was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree felony murder, while his wife Tatiana also received life in prison but with the possibility of parole. The judge said their actions showed an utter disregard for human life, ruling that religious belief does not excuse starving a child to death. This is why you should never let anyone kiss your baby, or just don't kiss someone else's baby. A 2-year-old boy from England recently lost vision in his left eye after someone with an active cold sore kissed him, transferring the herpes simplex virus directly into his eye. The infection caused a blister to form on his cornea that quickly turned into a 4mm wide open wound, leading to repeated infections and permanent nerve damage. Doctors said the virus destroyed the feeling in that eye, and the brain eventually stopped sending signals to it, leaving him completely blind on that side. His parents tested negative for herpes, so doctors believe an acquaintance unknowingly passed the virus through a kiss. Despite weeks of treatment, the damage was irreversible, and doctors were later forced to sew his eyelid shut to protect what remained of that eye. In June of 2004, an 8-year-old girl slipped into the active pool at the Fort Worth Water Gardens, a fountain system powered by strong underground pumps that created a hidden undertow. When her father and 2 brothers jumped in to save her, they were immediately dragged under by the suction and drowned. A 4th bystander who tried to help was also pulled in and killed. None of them realized the pool contained currents strong enough to trap adults underwater, and by the time the pumps were shut off, all 4 rescuers were already dead. This was the moment when a routine day on the slope suddenly spiraled into chaos, when a chairlift at Georgia's Gadori Ski Resort malfunctioned and began racing backward down the mountain. The lift reversed at high speed, smashing chairs together at the bottom terminal and violently throwing riders to the ground, while others were forced to jump to avoid being crushed by swinging metal seats. Screams erupted as people piled at the base of the lift, with some narrowly missing being struck by flying chairs and bodies. At least 8 people were seriously injured, including tourists from several countries, with reported injuries ranging from broken limbs to head and spinal trauma. Investigators later concluded the rollback was triggered by an electrical failure, which was only worsened by operator error after emergency procedures were not properly followed. In the aftermath, the lift operator was suspended and resort managers were forced to resign. Criminal and civil investigations later followed, examining how a system designed to keep riders safe turned into a death trap within seconds. This was the horrifying moment a young child was nearly killed by her bus driver when she became trapped after her backpack was caught in the closing door of a Kentucky school bus as she was getting off. The driver then pulled away without noticing, dragging the child alongside the moving bus for hundreds of feet. Luckily, honking bystanders eventually caught the bus driver's attention and she was forced to come to an abrupt stop. The girl suffered serious physical injuries including nerve damage, requiring nearly a dozen surgeries and skin grafts, along with lasting psychological trauma. Court filings noted that she was a special needs student and argued that the bus route, supervision, and safety procedures in place were not appropriate for her needs. The bus driver was removed from duty and later fired, and the school district acknowledged failures in safety oversight. Years later, the child, publicly identified as Allie Rednauer, is back on her feet but continues to deal with ongoing physical and emotional effects and continued medical care. The case ultimately ended with a nearly $5 million settlement, and Allie and her family have since spoken out, pushing for mandatory school bus safety upgrades and warning that without changes, another child could be seriously injured or killed in the same way. At the height of her Disney fame, Ashley Tisdale was battling serious health and mental struggles. Since childhood, she had suffered from severe anxiety and panic attacks, and during her High School Musical years, they became so intense that she was repeatedly rushed to hospitals believing she was having heart attacks until doctors realized it was panic. The stress left her barely eating and constantly exhausted. In 2007, at 21 years old, months of unexplained pain led doctors to discover a tumor in her breast that required surgery, later confirmed to be benign. Years later, she revealed she developed alopecia, causing patches of her hair to fall out from stress and autoimmune issues, saying the pressure to appear fine through the years came at a real cost to her health. In January of 2026 in Pennsylvania, 11-year-old Clayton Dietz fatally shot his adoptive father, Douglas Dietz, on the night of the boy's own birthday after his Nintendo Switch was taken away from him. Police say the child waited until his father fell asleep on the couch, found the key to his gun safe, loaded a handgun, and shot him once in the head. The boy later admitted he did it out of anger over losing his game console. Douglas Dietz died at the scene, while prosecutors charged the boy with criminal homicide and moved to try him as an adult, calling the case one of the most disturbing juvenile killings in recent years. Comedy legend Artie Lange survived one of the most self-destructive spirals in modern celebrity. In January of 2010, after years of severe heroin addiction, he stabbed himself multiple times in the abdomen inside his Hoboken apartment, collapsing from internal bleeding and barely surviving emergency surgery. His addiction later led to overdoses, constant arrests, homelessness, and the collapse of his nasal septum as a result of long-term cocaine abuse, permanently disfiguring his face. Thankfully, in recent years, Lange has said he's sober, lives mostly out of the spotlight, and prioritizes stability and health over returning to fame. In 2007, Shelley Miscavige, the wife of Scientology leader David Miscavige and once one of the organization's most powerful figures, attended her father's funeral and then completely vanished from public view. She's not been seen, photographed, or heard from publicly ever since. In 2013, actress and Scientology defector Leah Remini filed a missing persons report, prompting the LAPD to state they had located Shelley and confirmed she was alive and safe, though no evidence, images, or details were released, and no independent verification has ever occurred. Former Scientology members allege she was removed from leadership and confined to a secret church facility due to internal conflicts with David, claims which the organization vehemently denies, leaving her disappearance unresolved nearly 2 decades later. This was the moment a 7-Eleven was destroyed during a brazen Christmas Eve ATM theft in Texas. In the early morning hours of December 24, 2025, surveillance footage from a 7-Eleven near Fort Worth shows 2 suspects smashing through the front of the store, attaching a cable to the ATM and using a stolen SUV to violently rip the machine through the building. After destroying half the store, the suspects fled, abandoning the ATM and SUV nearby and still remain unidentified. There's a tree in Pakistan that's been chained and officially arrested since 1898. This happened when a drunk British officer thought the tree was moving towards him and ordered one of his men to arrest it. 3 Nigerian men were arrested at Oran International Airport in Algeria after trying to fly to Dubai disguised as Arab women. Wrapped in hijabs, niqabs, and heavy makeup, they tried to slip through security, but officers noticed their documents didn't match and spotted stubble beneath the veils. A quick secondary check exposed the trio immediately, and they were taken into custody on the spot. Here's a photo of a young American soldier who would become the face of one of the darkest scandals of the Iraq War. Sabrina Harmon was a 26-year-old U.S. Army reservist stationed at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2003, where she became involved in a massive abuse scandal after photographs surfaced showing prisoners being humiliated, tortured, and posed like trophies. In the most infamous image, Harmon is seen smiling and giving a thumbs up while standing next to the dead body of an Iraqi detainee named Monadel al-Jamadi, who had died in agony during a CIA interrogation after being suspended from the ceiling by his wrists. Other photos of her showed naked prisoners stacked in pyramids, forced to simulate sex acts, threatened with dogs, and terrorized while hooded and restrained. Many of the prisoners photographed were never charged with any crime. Some were held solely because they were picked up during raids or turned in by rivals for bounties. Harmon later admitted she took dozens of photos and wrote home that the abuse was a joke and that watching prisoners suffer and die was, quote, pretty funny. She was convicted in 2005 of conspiracy, dereliction of duty, and maltreatment, and sentenced to 6 months in military prison, a dishonorable discharge, and loss of rank. The images shocked the world and became some of the most infamous symbols of U.S. war crimes in Iraq. This was the moment a military wife was caught on camera trying to poison her husband. In 2023 in Tucson, Arizona, Melody Feliciano Johnson repeatedly poured bleach into the coffee maker of her U.S. Air Force husband during a bitter divorce. When his coffee began tasting strange and making him feel nauseous, he first assumed the machine had mold before testing it with pool strips, which showed dangerously high levels of chlorine. Suspecting he was being poisoned, he set up hidden cameras in their kitchen, which later recorded his wife adding bleach to the coffee reservoir. Although he avoided serious injury or death by pretending to drink the coffee, investigators said he believed she was trying to kill him to collect his life insurance benefits. She later took a plea deal and was sentenced to probation, mental health treatment, and a no-contact order. These are the graves believed to belong to the 63 wives of Indian General Afzal Khan dating back to 1659. Historical accounts suggest an astrologer predicted the general would die in his next battle, and fearing that his wives would remarry after his death, he ordered all 63 of them to be executed before leaving for war. Soon afterward, Khan was killed in battle just as the prophecy foretold. Today, the cemetery still stands in Afzalpura, India, a site tied to one of the darkest stories associated with honor, power, and possession in Indian history.